The city never truly slept. Even in the quiet hours before dawn, when the streets of southern Italy should have belonged only to stray dogs and drifting fog, something always lingered beneath the surface. A presence, a system, a silence enforced not by law, but by fear. The film never showed how that silence was built. It was not created overnight. It was cultivated patiently, deliberately, through generations of violence, loyalty, and blood. And in the early 1980s, one man would learn exactly what that silence demanded. His name was Salvatore Rizzo. According to multiple documented accounts, Rizzo was not born into power. He did not inherit influence, nor was he raised among the upper ranks of organized crime. His beginnings were modest, almost unremarkable. A dockworker's son from Palermo, he grew up in a neighborhood where survival often depended on understanding when to speak, and more importantly, when not to. His father worked long hours unloading cargo ships that arrived under the cover of darkness. Crates passed through his hands that were never inspected, never questioned. As a child, Salvatore watched closely. He learned early that some shipments carried more than goods. They carried protection. They carried consequences. By the age of 14, he had already begun running errands for local men whose names were never spoken aloud. Small tasks at first, delivering envelopes, watching street corners, memorizing faces. There was no formal introduction, no ceremony, only quiet acknowledgement. He was useful, and in that world, usefulness was everything. By 18, Rizzo had abandoned any pretense of a legitimate future. He no longer worked the docks. Instead, he operated within the growing shadow network that controlled much of Palermo's underground economy. Extortion, smuggling, protection rackets. He became involved in all of it. But what separated Rizzo from others was not his brutality. It was his discipline. He spoke little. He listened carefully, and he never made unnecessary moves. Older men noticed. According to investigators who later reconstructed his early rise, Rizzo became associated with a mid-level capo named Vincenzo Carbone, a man known for his calculated approach to business. Carbone was not impulsive. He valued structure, order, and in Salvatore, he saw something rare. Control. Under Carbone's guidance, Rizzo began to climb. He was introduced to larger operations. Shipments moved through the port with increasing frequency, and Rizzo was tasked with overseeing distribution points across the city. His responsibilities expanded quickly. With each assignment, his reputation grew, not as a violent enforcer, but as a man who delivered results without drawing attention. In the world of organized crime, that made him valuable, but it also made him visible. By the early 1980s, Palermo had become a battleground. The film never showed the true scale of the violence that consumed the city during those years. Rival factions fought for dominance, not in open warfare, but through targeted assassinations. Judges, police officers, politicians, no one was beyond reach. Bodies appeared in alleyways. Cars exploded without warning. Entire families vanished. This was not chaos. It was strategy, and within that strategy, Rizzo found himself moving closer to the center. Carbone's influence had grown significantly, and with it, Rizzo's responsibilities. He began coordinating not just shipments, but negotiations, delicate arrangements between rival groups that required precision and absolute discretion. According to multiple sources, it was during this period that Rizzo made his first critical mistake. At the time, it did not appear significant. A meeting had been arranged between Carbone's faction and a competing family operating out of Trapani. The purpose was simple: resolve a dispute over territory tied to narcotics distribution routes. Tensions had escalated, and both sides sought to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. Rizzo was assigned to facilitate. The location was carefully chosen, a neutral warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Security was tight. Every participant was vetted, every detail controlled, or so they believed. Investigators later discovered that, in the days leading up to the meeting, Rizzo had altered one small element of the arrangement, a minor adjustment to the timing, a change in the sequence of arrivals. On paper, it meant nothing. In reality, it shifted everything. The meeting proceeded without incident. Agreements were reached. Hands were shaken. For a brief moment, it appeared that a fragile peace had been secured. But the truth was far darker. Within 48 hours, Two key figures from the Trapani faction were found dead. Execution style. No witnesses. No suspects. Only a message. The balance had been broken, and suspicion spread quickly. At first, attention focused outward. Rival groups were blamed. Retaliation was expected. Palermo braced for another wave of violence. But within Carbone's inner circle, questions began to emerge. Quietly, carefully, because in that world, accusations were not made lightly. They were proven. According to later testimony from informants, Carbone himself did not react immediately. He observed. He listened. He allowed others to speak while he remained silent. And then, slowly, he began to piece together the sequence of events. The altered timing, the unexpected movements, the precise window in which the victims had been isolated. It was too exact, too deliberate, and it pointed inward. Rizzo, unaware of the growing suspicion, continued his work. If anything, his confidence had increased. The successful negotiation had elevated his standing. He was trusted, respected, but trust in that world was fragile, and respect could vanish overnight. The film never showed how quickly alliances could shift. One moment, a man could stand at the center of power. The next, he could be marked for death. According to multiple documented accounts, the decision was not immediate. Carbone did not act out of anger. He acted out of necessity. Because if Rizzo had acted independently, if he had manipulated the meeting for personal gain, it represented something far more dangerous than betrayal. It represented ambition. And ambition, uncontrolled, threatened the entire structure. But there was another possibility, one that was even more dangerous. That Rizzo had not acted alone, that he had been influenced, directed, perhaps even recruited by a rival faction seeking to destabilize Carbone's operations from within. Investigators later uncovered fragments of communication, brief, coded exchanges that suggested Rizzo had been in contact with individuals outside his immediate circle. Nothing definitive, but enough to raise concern, enough to justify action. Still, Carbone waited, because in the world he operated in, timing was everything. A move made too early could expose weakness. A move made too late could invite collapse. And so he watched. He allowed Rizzo to continue operating, even as the circle around him began to tighten. Assignments became more specific, movements more restricted, conversations more guarded. But Rizzo did not notice, or perhaps he chose not to. According to those who later analyzed his behavior, Rizzo had begun to believe in his own position. He saw himself not as a subordinate, but as a rising figure, someone capable of shaping outcomes, of influencing decisions. It was a subtle shift, but in that world, subtle shifts often carried fatal consequences. The final confirmation came unexpectedly. A routine surveillance report, a minor observation. Rizzo had met with a man known to be loosely connected to a rival organization. The meeting was brief. No witnesses overheard their conversation, but the location and the secrecy was enough. Carbone no longer needed proof. He needed resolution. The order was given quietly. No announcement, no confrontation, just a decision. Rizzo would be removed, but not immediately, because Carbone wanted something first. He wanted to understand the full extent of the breach, to identify anyone else who might be involved, to ensure that when the move was made, it would not create further instability. And so, a plan began to form, carefully constructed, patiently executed. Rizzo, still unaware, continued his routine. He attended meetings, oversaw operations, maintained the appearance of control. But beneath the surface, everything had changed. Every movement was being tracked, every interaction observed. The world around him had become a closed system, designed not to support him, but to contain him. The film never showed this part, the quiet phase, the period where a man was already condemned, but still allowed to walk freely. Because what came next required precision, it required certainty, and above all, it required silence. According to multiple accounts, the opportunity presented itself on a night that seemed no different from any other. A routine meeting, a familiar location, a controlled environment. Rizzo arrived without hesitation, without suspicion, and as he stepped inside, the door closed behind him with a finality he did not yet understand. Inside, the room was already occupied, and in that moment, everything changed. Inside, the room was already occupied, and in that moment, everything changed. The film never showed how quickly a man's reality could collapse. There was no dramatic buildup, no warning, just a shift in atmosphere so subtle it could only be recognized once it was too late. Salvatore Rizzo stopped, not abruptly, not enough to reveal fear, but just long enough. According to later testimony, he understood immediately. The positioning of the men, the silence, the absence of casual movement. No one greeted him. No one spoke his name. This was not a meeting. This was a judgment. Vincenzo Carbone stood near the far wall, partially obscured by shadow. His expression remained unchanged, calm, almost detached. He did not approach. He did not need to, because the outcome had already been decided. Rizzo's instincts, refined over years of survival, began to calculate possibilities. Escape routes, distances, timing. There were none. The door behind him had already been secured. Two men stepped forward, not aggressively, not hurried. Their movements were controlled, rehearsed. According to multiple documented accounts, what followed did not resemble the chaotic violence often portrayed in fiction. There were no raised voices, no dramatic confrontation, only precision. Carbone finally spoke. His words were measured, deliberate. He did not accuse outright. Instead, he outlined a sequence of events, small inconsistencies, minor deviations, subtle decisions that, when placed together, formed a pattern. The altered timing of the meeting, the isolation of the Trapani figures, the contact with external associates, each detail delivered calmly, without emotion, because this was not about anger. It was about order. Rizzo listened. He did not interrupt. Investigators later noted that this was consistent with his character. Even in that moment, he maintained control. He did not plead. He did not deny immediately. He waited. But the truth was far darker, because Rizzo understood something that others in that room did not. He had not been as careful as he believed. And now, every decision he had made, every calculated risk, was being laid out before him with undeniable clarity. When he finally spoke, his response was brief. He denied involvement. Of course he did, because in that world, confession was not survival. Silence was. But Carbone was not seeking a confession. He was confirming a conclusion. According to accounts reconstructed years later, the meeting had been orchestrated not to determine guilt, but to observe reaction, to measure composure, to eliminate doubt. And Rizzo, despite his discipline, had revealed enough, not through panic, but through restraint, because he did not ask the most important question. He did not ask why he had been brought there, which meant he already knew. That was enough. Carbone gave a slight nod, and with that, the process moved forward. The first strike came without warning. Not a gunshot. That would have been too loud, too unpredictable. Instead, it was controlled, methodical, a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm before resistance could form. Rizzo reacted instantly. Years of experience took over. He fought back with precision, targeting weaknesses, creating space. For a brief moment, it appeared he might break through. But the room had been prepared. Every angle accounted for. Every movement anticipated. He was outnumbered. And more importantly, he had been studied. According to investigators, the men involved knew his tendencies, his reactions, his patterns under pressure. They had trained for this moment. The struggle was short, not because Rizzo lacked skill, but because the outcome had already been engineered. Within seconds, he was restrained, still conscious, still aware, and that was intentional, because what followed was not just an execution. It was a message. The film never showed this part either. The controlled dismantling of a man, not just physically, but symbolically. Carbone approached slowly. He looked down at Rizzo, not with anger, but with something colder. Disappointment. According to multiple sources, Carbone spoke again, but this time, his words were quieter, meant only for the man before him. He spoke of structure, of trust, of consequences, because in that world, betrayal was not measured by intent. It was measured by impact, and Rizzo's actions, whether calculated or reckless, had disrupted the balance. That alone was unforgivable. What happened next was carried out with chilling efficiency. No hesitation, no spectacle, because the purpose was not to create fear through chaos. It was to reinforce control through certainty. Rizzo was executed inside that room, cleanly, deliberately, and without witnesses beyond those required. But the story did not end there. Because in organized crime, death was only part of the message. The rest was delivered afterward. According to investigative records, Rizzo's body was not immediately disposed of. Instead, it was handled with calculated intent. Every detail of its eventual discovery was planned. The location, the condition, the timing. Because Carbone understood something fundamental. A silent death meant nothing. A discovered death meant everything. 2 days later, authorities received an anonymous tip. A vehicle had been abandoned near an industrial zone outside Palermo. It had not moved. Its windows were darkened, its presence out of place. When officers arrived, they approached cautiously. They had seen this before, but not like this. Inside the vehicle, Rizzo's body had been positioned deliberately, not concealed, displayed. Investigators later noted the precision of the scene. There were no signs of struggle inside the car, no chaotic evidence. Everything had been arranged. This was not disposal. This was presentation. The message was clear. Betrayal would not be hidden. It would be exposed. The news spread quickly. Within hours, word had reached every corner of the network. Rizzo was dead, and more importantly, he had been judged. According to informants, the reaction within the organization was immediate. Silence. Not fear in the conventional sense, but recalibration. Men who had once interacted freely now became cautious. Conversations shortened. Movements adjusted. Because Rizzo had not been an outsider, he had been trusted. And if he could be removed so cleanly, so decisively, no one was beyond reach. But beneath that silence, something else began to form. Questions. Quiet first, then growing. Because Rizzo's alleged betrayal had never been fully explained. There was no public accusation, no formal declaration, only an outcome. And in that absence of clarity, uncertainty took hold. According to later testimony, some began to wonder whether Rizzo had truly acted alone. Others questioned whether he had been made an example for reasons that extended beyond the known events. Because in organizations built on secrecy, truth was often layered, and what was presented was rarely complete. Meanwhile, law enforcement took notice. Rizzo's death was not just another casualty in an already violent landscape. It was different. The precision, the staging, the message. It indicated structure, coordination, control. Investigators began to look deeper. They revisited past cases, examined patterns, cross-referenced movements, and slowly, a larger picture began to emerge. Rizzo had not been operating in isolation. His activities, particularly in the weeks leading up to his death, suggested connections that had not yet been fully understood. Meetings that had gone undocumented, transactions that lacked clear authorization, contacts that did not align with his known network. The implications were significant, because if Rizzo had been part of a broader shift, if he had been engaging with external factions, then his death was not the end of the problem. It was the beginning, and Carbone, whether he realized it or not, had just exposed something much larger. Within weeks, tensions began to rise again. Not openly, not yet, but beneath the surface, movement had resumed. Old alliances were reconsidered. New conversations began, because power, once disrupted, rarely returns to its original form. It evolves, and often, it fractures. According to multiple documented accounts, the first indication came in the form of a disappearance. One of Carbone's trusted lieutenants failed to report in. No explanation, no trace. At first, it was dismissed as routine. Men vanished in that world. But this was different, because this man had been present during Rizzo's execution, and his absence was not random. It was deliberate. Days later, another figure disappeared, then another, each connected, each linked, in some way, to the events surrounding Rizzo. The pattern was undeniable. Someone was responding, not with public violence, but with precision. The same precision Carbone had used. And that meant one thing. This was not retaliation. This was strategy. Investigators later concluded that Rizzo's death had triggered a chain reaction, one that extended far beyond what anyone in that room had anticipated. Because whatever role Rizzo had truly played, he had not been the only one. And now, the structure Carbone had worked so carefully to maintain was beginning to shift beneath him. Quietly, invisibly, but inevitably. And as the disappearances continued, one realization became impossible to ignore. Salvatore Rizzo's fatal mistake had not just sealed his own fate. It had set something much larger into motion. Something that was now moving toward Carbone himself. Something that was now moving toward Vincenzo Carbone himself. The film never showed how power begins to erode. Not with explosions, not with public assassinations, but with absence. Men who once answered immediately began to hesitate. Messages took longer to return. Meetings were postponed, then quietly canceled. The structure that had once operated with precision started to develop gaps, small at first, almost unnoticeable. But in organizations built on control, even the smallest delay carried meaning. According to multiple documented accounts, Carbone recognized a shift almost immediately. He did not react publicly. He did not issue threats. Instead, he began to isolate variables. He reviewed movements, reconstructed timelines, reevaluated loyalties. Because what he was facing was not chaos. It was coordination. The disappearances were too precise, too selective. Only those connected to Salvatore Rizzo's final days were being removed, one by one, silently. Investigators later discovered that this phase marked the beginning of what would become a controlled internal collapse, an unraveling not driven by external law enforcement, but by something far more dangerous. Internal fracture. Carbone's first move was containment. He reduced operations, limited exposure, restricted communication channels. Only his most trusted associates were allowed direct contact. But trust, at that point, had already begun to decay. Because Rizzo's death, rather than restoring order, had introduced uncertainty. And uncertainty was something the organization had never been designed to withstand. According to informant testimony gathered years later, whispers began to circulate within the lower ranks. Questions without answers. Why had Rizzo truly been killed? What had he known? And more importantly, who else had known it? The official narrative that Rizzo had acted independently no longer satisfied those who operated closest to the truth, because the pattern unfolding suggested something else entirely. Rizzo had not been the architect. He had been a node, and removing him had not ended the threat. It had exposed it. The first confirmation came through an intercepted communication. Investigators, who had been monitoring fragments of activity following Rizzo's death, identified a series of coded exchanges between individuals previously considered peripheral. Names that had never appeared in central reports. Men who operated quietly, without visibility, but whose movements now aligned with the disappearances. According to those findings, a secondary network had been forming, one that existed parallel to Carbone's structure. Not in opposition, not initially, but with intent. The purpose was unclear, until it wasn't. Because as more pieces came together, a pattern emerged that redefined everything. Rizzo had not been betraying Carbone for personal gain. He had been facilitating contact, building pathways, testing boundaries for someone else. Someone who had no interest in negotiation, only transition. The film never showed how power could be taken without open conflict, because the most effective takeovers did not rely on visible violence. They relied on infiltration. And Carbone, despite his discipline, had allowed it to happen. According to multiple documented accounts, the man at the center of this emerging structure was identified only through fragments, aliases, indirect references, secondhand confirmations. His real name remained uncertain, but his presence was undeniable. He had been operating in the background for years, watching, waiting, and using men like Rizzo to map the system from within. By the time Carbone understood this, it was already too late. Because the network he believed he controlled had already been compromised at multiple levels. Financial routes, communication channels, logistical operations, all had been touched. Not enough to disrupt immediately, but enough to allow control to shift, quietly, gradually, irreversibly. Carbone responded the only way he knew how. He began removing people. Anyone even remotely connected to Rizzo's extended contacts was identified, isolated, and eliminated. But this time, the precision he once relied on began to fail. Targets disappeared before they could be reached. Information arrived too late. Operations were anticipated and avoided, because the structure he was trying to purge already knew his methods. It had learned from him, and now, it was adapting faster than he could respond. Investigators later described this phase as a reversal. Carbone, once the architect of control violence, had become reactive, predictable, and in that world, predictability was fatal. The final shift came without warning. It did not begin with Carbone. It began with his closest circle. One by one, his most trusted men were removed. Not publicly, not violently. They simply vanished. No bodies, no messages, only absence. And that absence carried a meaning far more powerful than any display of force. It meant control had changed hands. According to informant accounts, Carbone retreated. Not physically, but operationally. He reduced his presence, limited his exposure to almost nothing.